Thank you for your kind welcome. Sydney Writers' Festival, in conjunction with the University of Western Sydney, has brought together tonight our two wonderful guests, Alice Walker and Alexis Wright. Alice Walker is an internationally celebrated author, poet and activist, whose books include 7 novels, 4 collections of short stories, 4 children's books and volumes of essays and poetry. Alice is best known, of course, for The Colour Purple, for which she won the Pulitzer Prize and the National Book Award. She was the first African-American woman to win the Pulitzer Prize in fiction, though, in her opinion, not the first to deserve it. The novel was adapted for Steven Spielberg's film and later for the stage. Her most recent books are a collection of essays, The Cushion in the Road, Meditation and Wandering as the Whole World Awakens to Being in Harm's Way, and a collection of poems, The World Will Follow Joy, Turning Madness into Flowers. Please welcome Alice Walker. Our other distinguished guest tonight is Alexis Wright, a member of the Wanyee Nation of the Southern Highlands of the Gulf of Carpentaria. Her books include the non-fiction Grog War, a study of alcohol abuse in Tennant Creek, and the novels Plains of Promise and Carpentaria, which won the Miles Franklin Literary Award, the Victorian and Queensland Premiers Awards, and the Australian Literary Society Gold Medal, and was published in the US, UK, China, Italy, France, Spain and Poland. She is a distinguished fellow in the University of Western Sydney's Writing and Society Research Centre. Her most recent acclaimed book, currently on the shortlist for the Miles Franklin Award, is The Swan Book. Please welcome Alexis Wright. Thank you. My name is Melissa Lukashenko. If I could start, Alice, by asking you to speak to place. You were born in a rural community in Georgia to very poor sharecropping parents, and you've said in The Cushion in the Road that wherever you meet poor farmers, you automatically think of your parents. In your first novel, The Third Life of Grange Copeland, the character Brownfield Copeland is named by his exhausted mother for the actual fields of the slave trade. As a young woman, you lived in Mississippi, a place that your own sister said that she found so frightening that she didn't even like the idea of you flying over it. Could you speak to the nature of being from a place, the South, which is so deep in your being and precious to your spirit, and yet at the same time so frightening?
Yes, it was extremely frightening to be among racists all the time, to have the possibility of humiliation if you went into town. We only went into town once a week. But the counterbalance to any kind of racism and pathological behavior is to have nature as your comfort. And so even though there were many, brutally disfigured people in terms of their own pathology that we had to live among and under, actually, there was always the beauty of the trees, always the beauty of the creeks and the rivers. And we loved the land with the passion that I find here, too, that people love the land. And wherever people love the land, I do feel an affinity. Wherever people work with the land and don't abuse it, but respect it, I feel a deep affinity. If I visit a place and they tell me that they truly love their olive trees and their peach orchards and, their fields of wheat, I don't need to know anything else about them to care about them, because I know that kind of passion for the earth.
Thank you. Alexis, the Swan book is, of course, a novel which is about love of country and about, I suppose, in a bigger sense, how people can belong, how displaced people can belong on country, both Aboriginal displaced people and immigrants in the form of belladonna. Is there a way for people, as Alice says, people who are psychically damaged, to come to a reconciliation with country?
I think we have a lot of problems here in this country with what happened to the land, and that hasn't been recognised to this day. There's been no real settlement and understanding and moving forward and having a vision forward that we can all be. It's a shared vision. We haven't had that conversation. And it seemed, I was in a session this morning with hearing Ali Kubman speak, and with Anita Heiss and Henry Reynolds about intervention. And it just, it occurred to me, and that the only real conversations that we have in this country are through the courts. And through the courts about land rights, through the courts about native title, and that's the only time when we're forced to really talk to each other and work out some process. It may not be a good process. Yes. It's often compromise, but that seems to me, and right now where we're at, that's probably where we're going. We have to go back to the court, and whether it's in Australia or it's a world court, I don't know, and I don't know how it's going to be done. But we really need to have the conversation, and if it's not an agreed conversation and a forced conversation, just as we have had in the past, because we don't have it. And so, to me, once we can get past that, then we can all have that shared vision and understanding of the land, and then people do have understanding and a relationship with the land, but they don't understand that very deep spiritual relationship that Aboriginal people have in this country, and are trying to hold it while all around there's been damage done that we haven't been able to really rectify or work out the right way of looking after the earth, looking after the country, looking after our particular traditional domain. And we do need to welcome, to acknowledge the land we're on here, and I do acknowledge the people, traditional owners here too.
Yes, yes, of course. Alice, another quote from The Cushion in the Road is, I think you mentioned fleetingly, Che Guevara saying that revolution is at its heart about tenderness. As Alexis is saying, the conversation in Australia about land rights and about belonging in a broader sense has been fought largely through the courts, not on an individual or community level. You were active in the civil rights struggle of the 60s and 70s, very active, at a great personal cost. What role did tenderness play in that struggle?
I think it was just what took me to Mississippi, actually, was the realization that the same people, almost identical, actually, to my parents, sharecroppers, who were trying to vote, because at that time, to try to vote meant that your house could be burned down with you in it. But I realized that those people were my parents. I mean, I just was born in Georgia and they were in Mississippi, but they were just the same people. And so my love of my parents and my understanding of what they had withstood sent me to be with these people in Mississippi. Part of the reason I went to Mississippi and not stayed in Georgia was because it would have been too stressful for my parents to know where I was, and what I was doing. So often I just didn't tell them. But my work among dispossessed people and people who had exhibited so much bravery. My father, for instance, was the first black man to vote. He had a house full of children, as he liked to put it, and yet he walked past 3 white men holding shotguns in order to vote. And this is the kind of bravery, the kind of courage that I saw in the South, and especially in Mississippi. Mississippi was, I think what people saw on the screens, their TV screens, just showed, the horror and the brutality of this, this fascist state. But the other side of that was this incredible tenderness that people had for each other. Just the most soulful love of each other, tending to each other, as you're knocked down on the street, as you're bleeding, as though they've, turned the big water hoses on you. People come in to pick you up, and tending to you, and singing to you, and making you feel loved. And so that is why I believe the transformation in the South, from a nonviolent point of view, has lasted in a better way, because there just was that tenderness, and it was never undermined. So that when you go back to the South to this day, there is still a courtesy, there is a kindness, there is a warmth that you don't always feel in other parts of our country.
Your father's astonishing courage, where do you think that came from?
Well, economically, if they didn't have a New Deal, which was being promised politically, people were about to starve. There was a period when we had, I don't think I was born quite yet, but there was a period when they went through having no flour and no meal, and so the government would send flour and meal into the communities. But because my mother was a good-looking woman who, could put on secondhand clothes and look great, when she would go down to get this government surplus food, she was refused because the woman in charge of giving it out was so angry that she looked so good that she just wouldn't, she wouldn't give it,
She didn't fit the part of the
she
downtrodden
didn't.
recipient.
No, and my mother was a woman of dignity, so she was not going to beg them. And she and my father and the other parents and the teachers, the school teachers that my father had actually found and brought to our community to teach us. Also, they built us a school which was burned to the ground, and then they built it again. But anyway, they circled, they got together and they figured out how they could swap things. So Miss Addie would give, a quarter of milk, and my parents would give, a peck of corn or whatever, and somebody else was growing beans and somebody else had saved something, and they managed to scrape by. And this is one of the foundations of community and also of tenderness and of caring. We will never get anywhere, any of us, if we can't share and be there for each other and figure these things out. We don't need anyone to do it for us, really. We have this capacity to carry ourselves through these hard times if we learn to rely on each other and to build trust. And that is what we had in these little communities.
Do you think, again, to go back to Third Life of Grange Copeland, Grange, towards the end of the book, tells his granddaughter Ruth, who is agog with the presence of Dr. King in the civil rights movement, and she asks him what asks her grandfather, how does he respond to Dr. King's message, Dr. King's presence? And she herself is overwhelmed by it. And he says something I thought that was very striking today, which was that he feels the power of Dr. King's message, but knowing that that man will never be president kind of takes the sweet out of it.
Well, and then if he lived today to see Obama as president, he would definitely feel the sour. Because what we are all being educated, hopefully, about the futility of believing in a system that's worldwide that is just means us no good. And we have to learn how to create something, either beside it or under it, or something that gives us life and gives us integrity and force. Because the way it's set up, even if you have a black person as president or a woman as president of a country that has a rotten system, it's going to be a rotten system. Mm-hmm. And the hope then would be that the woman or the man, the person of color, whoever, can actually just survive it. I wonder how Obama does survive this. Many people in that position just then glom onto the system as it is, and they embrace it. But then there's a cost to embracing something that is detrimental to you. And so it's quite a saga we're watching, all of us.
Mm-hmm. You write with great tenderness in your letters to President Obama, letters on the presence of torture in the world, letters on the burden of the presidency, and actually say that not to have won the presidency would in itself also have been a gift of a different kind.
Well, I don't want to take any time from Alexis, but can I just say...
Keep going. Please.
Can I just say, I met him when he came to San Francisco, and I introduced him to my community there, before we were trying to get votes and everything. And I said to him, as we had, a couple of seconds, and I said, you don't have to be president. You could be a writer. He's a good writer. Mm-hmm. And if you were a writer, you could remain free. And you could be anonymous when you wanted to be. And he laughed. But I still maintain that to be president of something, in the case of our country, that is so lethal to other people in the world, is not a positive. Mm-hmm. How is it a positive to be, bombing people, droning people, supplying weapons to, countries that do awful things to everybody? It is not good, and it's very not good for our children. I really was not happy that he had a second term, because I could see that the direction that was being taken would mean that our children would have the unfortunate opportunity of seeing him go into behavior that actually I do not want to see them emulate.
Alexis, in the Swan book, you create a portrait of an Aboriginal man, Warren Finch, a leader in a sense, but a leader in a very different sense to the other main Aboriginal male character, the Harbour Master, who is an Aboriginal healer, who you describe as, this is the Harbour Master. Maybe he was a bit of a king too. But Warren Finch plays an important political role in your book, and he pays for it quite dearly too, doesn't he? Can you talk about the costs of political engagement in that way for us?
Well, the character of Warren Finch is, he was trained to be a leader.
God's gift.
God's gift. He was such a talented boy, and he was trained, with the expectation that he would do really good things, in his world. But he became, a person who with influence in the whole world.
He was to be the saviour, wasn't he?
He was to be the saviour, and there is that expectation sometimes that we've got to have this Aboriginal person to be the God's gift, and everybody wants the God's gift, and we've seen that in reality, and then can't hear the voices of the masses, and he falls into the trap, of power and wanting to be the most powerful person, and
indeed ends up president of Australia.
He does, because the novel is set in the future, so 100 years in the future, with issues of global warming, global relationships that are built on the type of relationships that we're having with the world right now, and particularly with people in distress, the people that we call the other, and or the Aboriginal people, and we're the training ground, we're the practice ground,
the disposable people.
Yeah, and so if you can get away with that, you can start getting away with all sorts of things, and. So he falls that trap, and we do see that in real life too. People wanting to become part of the system and going in there and say, yes, I'll fix up all the problems for Aboriginal people, and I'll become a member of Parliament, and I'll become Abbott's right hand man, and and they all fail. They all fall down, and then the opposite is the character Olivia, who doesn't speak.
Yes.
And sometimes, and she could speak if she wants to,
yes.
but
she said something like, "I would rather die than speak to an idiot."
Yeah. Did she? She's got a good memory, this woman. Yeah. And so there's that power play there too. Who's the most powerful? The person on the ground who doesn't speak and is holding their own integrity in what they believe in, or the person who's playing the game.
Well, Alice has said that she thinks that silence is the best way to get real attention.
Well, because I think in silence, and especially in meditation, there's a possibility of at least knowing pretty much where you are. You may not know where the rest of the world is, but it's really helpful to know where you are. I mean, what are you willing to do? What are you made of? And what is important to you? I think that we see these so-called leaders in the world just rushing about, and it's clear that they really, I mean, I don't know if you've met many, but they're always like, they're on a roller thing that's just rolling, just rolling along the earth. But they don't seem to be very real. They don't seem to have any core that is left in them. A place where they cannot be moved from. So in silence, there is that good chance that you will be filled, with at least the sound of who you are and what you can and cannot do.
I did like your essay in your book, that we needed leaders who love us, who care about us.
Yeah, when you write again about Dr. King and what it means to have had someone love his people enough to die for his people, and what that does to the recipients of that love, I found that very moving.
Yes.
As you must have, of course. Alexis, I think you were going to read a short extract about Warren Finch and his return to community.
I do.
Or would you rather read from Carpentaria?
Well, I might just read. Alice asked if I would read from Carpentaria, but I could just. We'll read a little short extract from Carpentaria, and if you want, I could read that part. And this is just a small part of Carpentaria. Once upon a time, not even so long ago, while voyaging in the blackest of midnights, a strong seaman who was a wizard of many oceans had his memory stolen by thieving sea monsters, hissing spendthrift and spume, as they sped across the tops of stormy waves, growing taller than the trees. The mariner, robbed of his fear, his navigation birthright, and his good sense, did not call to his God, but cursed the raging sea in the foulest language of his homeland. Unheard by the tempest, an austere cyclone called Leda, that came this way from across the seas in a 100-year storm, the man chased after her black wind to recapture his memories. Like a man possessed, he flew through towering banks of waves whose crests collided and rolled with the spirit clouds of the heavens above. Open-mouthed waves roared with thousands of others in that terrible, deafening nightmare of the troubled sea, and rolled poor old Elias Smith down into the crushing depths of hell before throwing him back up again, flinging him to and fro, and he, mouth aghast, hoarse throat yelling nothing but silence, he kept on chasing the black wind before losing his memory forever. It's for you, Alice. And do you want me to continue reading or too much?
No, please do. Maybe just set it in context.
I will. This is Warren Finch, the God's gift, who, and I'm reading it tonight for someone in Sydney who has the same name, who...
That's shame job, all you Bunjalung.
Yeah, who said that Aboriginal ceremonies this week was bullshit. It was more than 20 years since the day Warren Finch had nearly killed himself for a swan, when he arrived in the army-run detention camp of the swamp in a flash car, a triumph, long-anticipated homecoming to his traditional homelands, with enough petrol for driving up and down the busy streets for nothing. Around he drove with his friends down every street and back roads and by roads, sizing up everybody who was black, thank you, checking out the despair, mentally adding up the figures and checking it twice, and deciding, like he was white, that it was all hopeless, nothing would help, and driving on. He was sure going to miss the pride of the place. The swamp had become truly wondrous in the eyes of the benefactors. These locals, along with the other detained people from God knows where, all jelly soft now from years of intergenerational interventionist Australian policies of domination, were true beholders of wonder and fever-ridden with the beauty of home. They had no say about anything important in their lives. This was an army-controlled Aboriginal detention camp for decades, where Warren Finch's Aboriginal government nation that was just down the road had grown prosperous with flukes of luck here and there, with flukes of luck here and there called mining, and saying yes, yes, yes to anything on offer, a bit of assimilation, a bit of integration, a bit of giving up your own sovereignty, a bit of closing the gap, and was always paraded as Australia's international showcase of human rights. The swamp people had seen life triumph. Hadn't they witnessed the growth of an enormous flock of swans on their country? The swans thought it was okay to live there. Well, this and the loveliness of their children and country, traditional or adopted, gushed like a permanent flowing river from their hearts. Hearts must have it sometimes, for after a lot of bureaucratic argy-bargy with Canberra for around 200 years, but who's counting the cost of crime? The community had been successful in giving the swamp a far perkier name of Swan Lake. It was the only thing they had ever achieved in a fight with Canberra. Their name received official status from Australia, and that was a beautiful thing in the eyes of the locals. But no, not Warren. He saw nothing for the sake of sentimentality. He drove right around the watery expanse for a bit of sightseeing, an excuse for intensifying and exercising his cynicism while describing what he was looking at to people who he was mobiling back down south. Finally, he snapped the mobile phone shut in disgust and parked his dust-coloured white government Commodore thing in the shade of the memorial. the twin giant concrete grey cross boomerangs. He stepped out of the car into the full force of a North Country summer's day and glanced at the block at the base of the boomerangs, the sign inscribing the dedication to all those who had fallen in the long Indigenous war against colonisation with the state of Australia and continued to fall. Who knows, if Warren Finch paid much attention to the memorial, he would have agreed on one thing at least, that it was a pretty ingenious idea to erect this traditional icon so symbolically embedded with psychological power. Nothing was going to beat clapping boomerangs, calling the stories and songs, not even Warren Finch standing around the base tapping his song into the concrete just to check that the whole damn thing was not crumbling from shonky trainee workmanship and likely to collapse on his car. He would not have known the local stories about what they thought was pride. The boomerangs belonged to the old people. They had devised an image of themselves as super mystical beings, joints of the afterlife, clapping these boomerangs all day long. These were their longed-for days. They said they would be better off dead, more powerful. They would telegraphically stream their stories forever through any time of the day, they said. We will haunt Australia good and proper, just like the spirits of the Anzacs living in war monuments all around the country, and just like the ghost of wars living in all that rust dumped in the swamp away from white people because they thought they were too powerful. Thank you.
Too powerful indeed.